March 20th, 1995, Tokyo, Monday morning rush hour. A city of 13 million people moves with the precision of a Swiss watch. It is a city built on a foundation of order, safety, and predictability. In the vast, intricate circulatory system of the subway, millions of commuters pack into clean, quiet train cars. They read newspapers, listen to music, or simply close their eyes for a moment of peace before the demanding workday begins. It is a scene of absolute, almost sacred normalcy. But on this morning, an invisible poison was seeping into the veins of the city. 5 men, disguised as ordinary commuters, boarded separate trains on 3 of Tokyo's busiest lines. They carried with them a secret weapon, conceived in a hidden fortress of fear and designed to trigger the apocalypse. And as the trains converged on Kasumigaseki Station, the very heart of the Japanese government, these men would unleash a nightmare that would shatter Japan's illusion of absolute safety forever. The attack was a feat of chilling, coordinated terror. On the Marunouchi line, 2 members, Ikuo Hayashi and Kenichi Hirose, boarded separate trains. On the Chiyoda line, another 2, Toru Toyoda and Masato Yokoyama, took their positions. And on the Hibiya line, the final member, Yasuo Hayashi, carried not 2 but 3 packages of the deadly payload. The packages were simple plastic bags, like those used for soft drinks, filled with a clear, odorless liquid and concealed within newspapers. Their tools were sharpened umbrella tips. As their trains approached the target, each man dropped his package to the floor, punctured it multiple times, and then calmly exited at the next stop, melting back into the morning crowds. They left behind a chemical time bomb. The liquid was sarin, a nerve agent so potent that a single microscopic drop absorbed through the skin can be fatal. It was developed by Nazi scientists as a weapon of war, designed to kill soldiers on a battlefield. It was never intended to be used on a civilian population, packed into the enclosed space of a subway car. As the sarin began to evaporate in the warm, crowded trains, the first signs of chaos appeared. It began subtly. Commuters' eyes began to water uncontrollably, and their vision dimmed, as if a dark filter had been thrown over the world. A crushing tightness gripped their chests, and they started to cough, struggling for air that wouldn't come. People began to stumble out of the trains at Kasumigaseki and other stations, collapsing onto the platforms, foaming at the mouth, their bodies convulsing in violent seizures. Panic erupted. No one knew what was happening. Was it an explosion? A fire? The enemy was invisible, silent, and everywhere. Station attendants and first responders who bravely rushed to the scene quickly became victims themselves, overcome by the fumes as they tried to drag the fallen to safety. The Tokyo subway, a symbol of Japan's technological and social order, had been transformed into a subterranean gas chamber. In the end, 13 people would die, and over 6,000 more would be injured, many left with permanent neurological damage, their lives forever altered by a poison they never saw. The question that screamed across Japan and the world was not just how, but who. Who would do this, and why? To understand how this unimaginable nightmare was unleashed upon the safest city in the world, we must go back in time to the story of the strange, charismatic, and deeply disturbed man who saw himself as a god. His name at birth was Chizuo Matsumoto. He was born in 1955 in a poor rural town in southern Japan, one of 7 children in a family of traditional tatami mat weavers. From a young age, he was an outcast, defined by his disability. Born with infantile glaucoma, he was completely blind in his left eye and had only partial, blurry vision in his right. This condition would shape his entire worldview. Because he was not completely blind, he was sent away to a government-run boarding school for the blind, where his limited sight gave him a distinct advantage over his classmates. He weaponized this advantage. He became a bully, a small-time tyrant who used his physical superiority to dominate and extort money from the other children. It was a cruel but formative experience, giving him an early taste of the power he would come to crave. After graduating, he was ambitious. He dreamed of becoming a politician, of achieving the status and respect he felt he was owed. But he failed to get into the prestigious University of Tokyo, a rejection that would fuel a lifelong resentment against the Japanese elite and the establishment. Adrift and angry, he turned to a life of petty crime and spiritual searching. He studied acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine, opening a small clinic. But his real business was selling snake oil. He peddled a so-called miracle cure, a mixture of orange peels and alcohol, which he sold for thousands of dollars, claiming it could cure everything from back pain to rheumatism. He was eventually arrested and convicted of fraud, a humiliating failure that pushed him further to the fringes. It was during this period of disgrace that he claimed to find his true calling. He traveled to India, immersing himself in yoga and Buddhist and Hindu teachings in the Himalayas. It was here, he would later claim, that he achieved the ultimate enlightenment, unlocking incredible supernatural powers. It was here that Chizuo Matsumoto died, and a new divine identity was born, Shoko Asahara. He returned to Japan a transformed man, armed with a new name and a powerful messianic story. He claimed he could levitate, producing a now infamous photograph of himself seemingly floating cross-legged in midair. The photo, which was later proven to be a simple trick of photography showing him merely jumping, would become his primary recruitment tool. He claimed he could read minds, teleport, and see the future with perfect clarity. He declared himself the new Christ, the Lamb of God, and the first enlightened being since the Buddha himself. In 1984, he founded a small yoga and meditation school called Aum Shinrikyo, which translates to Aum Supreme Truth. At first it seemed harmless, just another of the many new religions that were popular in a spiritually hungry post-war Japan. Asahara's charisma was undeniable. He was a gifted and theatrical speaker who could blend ancient spiritual teachings with modern anxieties about nuclear war, materialism, and a loss of traditional values. He offered a sense of purpose and a tight-knit community to those who felt lost in Japan's rigid, high-pressure society. His followers, many of whom were young, idealistic, and highly educated, were drawn to his promises of spiritual awakening and supernatural power. They saw him not as a con man, but as a living God, a true master who held the keys to the universe. The belief system that Asahara constructed for Aum Shinrikyo was a bizarre and terrifying cocktail of ideas. He cherry-picked concepts from Tibetan Buddhism, esoteric Hinduism, and Christian apocalyptic prophecies, and mixed them all with his own paranoid delusions and a heavy dose of science fiction. He taught that the world as we knew it was corrupt, a fallen state consumed by materialism and sin. He prophesied a coming Armageddon, which he meticulously detailed for his followers. He claimed a final war, World War III, would erupt in 1997. This war, he preached, would be fought with nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, triggered by a secret global conspiracy of Jews, Freemasons, the British royal family, and a rival Japanese Buddhist organization. In his paranoid worldview, these shadowy forces were all secretly controlled by the United States, which he called the Beast. In this apocalyptic firestorm, all of humanity would be wiped out, except for his chosen followers, the spiritually pure members of Aum, who would survive to build a new, perfect world, a utopian kingdom with him as their holy king. To achieve the spiritual purity required to survive this apocalypse, his disciples underwent brutal and bizarre training regimens. They practiced extreme asceticism, fasting for long periods, meditating for days on end in freezing cold chambers, and hanging themselves upside down to purify their bodies. They were encouraged to drink his bathwater and his blood, which were sold for exorbitant prices, believing it would transfer his spiritual energy to them. He also made extensive use of powerful hallucinogenic drugs like LSD, which he would administer to followers in so-called initiation rituals to induce spiritual visions and break down their psychological defenses. One of the most insidious tools of this brainwashing was the Perfect Salvation Initiation, or PSI, headset. It was a bizarre, helmet-like device that delivered low-voltage electric shocks to the wearer's brain, synchronized with a continuous loop of Shoko Asahara's voice, chanting his mantras and sermons 24 hours a day. Followers would wear these for weeks at a time, a direct line for the guru's indoctrination to be piped into their skulls, eroding their ability to think critically. Perhaps the most dangerous and consequential of all his teachings was the concept of poa. This was a twisted interpretation of a Tibetan Buddhist ritual for transferring consciousness at the time of death. In Asahara's hands, it became a justification for murder. He claimed that he, as an enlightened master, could see a person's karma. If a person had bad karma and was destined for a terrible reincarnation, he argued that killing them was actually an act of mercy. By killing them, he was not murdering them, but actually saving their soul, transferring their consciousness to a higher plane of existence. This single, terrifying belief would later become the cult's internal green light for assassination, removing any moral or ethical barriers to killing their enemies. As Aum's following grew into the tens of thousands, so did its wealth, its ambition, and its paranoia. The group began a chilling transformation from a quirky yoga cult into a highly organized, well-funded, and dangerous paramilitary organization. Asahara's genius was not just in attracting lost spiritual seekers, but in his highly strategic recruitment of Japan's best and brightest minds. He actively targeted the elite of the elite, brilliant young scientists, doctors, and engineers from Japan's most prestigious universities. These were young men who had followed the rules their entire lives, aced their exams, and were on a fast track to a successful, but, in their eyes, soulless life as a corporate salaryman. Asahara offered them something more, a chance to escape the rigid conformity of Japanese society and use their incredible skills for a higher purpose, to build the weapons that would save the world. These brilliant, disillusioned minds would become the architects of Aum's doomsday machine. The cult established a massive, isolated compound at the foot of Mount Fuji, a self-contained world with dormitories, training halls, and a series of laboratories they called Satyan, or Truth. Life inside was a world away from the order of Japan. Followers were forced to sever all ties with their families, donate their entire life savings to the cult, and submit to the absolute authority of the guru. Dissent was not tolerated. Those who tried to leave were captured, imprisoned in shipping containers, subjected to intense drug-induced interrogations, and sometimes they simply disappeared, victims of a Poa ritual. One of the earliest and most notorious cases was the disappearance of Tsutsumi Sakamoto, a courageous lawyer who was helping a group of concerned parents prepare a lawsuit against the cult. In 1989, Sakamoto, his wife, and their one-year-old infant son vanished from their home in Yokohama. It was years before their bodies were found, buried in separate, remote locations. They had been brutally murdered by an Aum hit squad. The cult was now a killer, and it had proven it could act with impunity. Inside their fortress of fear, Aum's elite scientists began a project of unimaginable horror to build an arsenal of chemical, biological, and conventional weapons capable of bringing about the apocalypse Asahara had prophesied. They built a massive, sophisticated chemical plant called Satyan 7, a facility that, under the guise of printing and religious goods, was designed to produce tons of deadly chemicals. With their team of brilliant chemists, they successfully synthesized a range of nerve agents, including sarin and VX, the most toxic chemical weapon ever created. They attempted to cultivate biological weapons like anthrax and botulinum toxin, and even sent a mission to Zaire in 1992 under the guise of a humanitarian aid mission, in a failed attempt to obtain a live sample of the Ebola virus. Their ambition was boundless. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, they traveled to Russia and attempted to buy a nuclear warhead, tanks, and other military hardware. While they failed to acquire a nuke, they did succeed in buying a Russian Mi-17 military transport helicopter and schematics for Kalashnikov assault rifles, which they began to manufacture in secret at their compound. They were building an army. Before the attack on Tokyo subway, there was a dark and deadly dress rehearsal. In June of 1994, the cult loaded a customized refrigerator truck with liquid sarin and drove to the city of Matsumoto. Their target was a building where 3 judges lived, who were presiding over a real estate lawsuit that Aum was about to lose. Under the cover of darkness, they activated a fan and a heater in the back of the truck, releasing the sarin gas into the quiet residential neighborhood. The attack was a success from Aum's perspective. The gas drifted through the open windows of the apartment complex, killing 8 innocent people and injuring over 500 more. It was a horrifying tragedy, but local police completely misinterpreted the event. Their investigation focused on a local resident who had been storing chemicals for his business, and they publicly named him as the primary suspect, destroying his reputation. The police failed to see that this was a deliberate act of chemical terrorism. For Aum, it was a valuable lesson. It proved that their sarin worked, and that they could get away with it. The path to their final apocalyptic act in Tokyo was now clear. The aftermath of the March 1995 subway attack was a moment of national reckoning for Japan. As the scale of the horror became clear, and evidence, including chemical residues found at their compounds, pointed directly towards Aum Shinrikyo, the country's police forces launched the biggest manhunt in their history. Tens of thousands of officers, clad in protective gear, conducted massive, coordinated raids on Aum compounds across the country. They found a scene out of a science fiction movie: sophisticated laboratories filled with chemical precursors, stockpiles of weapons, malnourished prisoners being held in shipping containers, and a terrified, brainwashed population of followers. But the guru himself was missing. For nearly 2 months, Shoko Asahara remained a ghost, taunting the police. Finally, in May, acting on a tip, police conducted a final, meticulous raid on a building at the main compound. They found him hiding, alone, in a tiny secret chamber concealed between the ceiling of one floor and the floor of the one above. The self-proclaimed god was found with stacks of cash and a mattress, a pathetic and ignominious end to his reign of terror. The trials that followed were long and complex, captivating the nation for years. One by one, the elite members of the cult, the brilliant scientists and loyal enforcers, were tried and sentenced. The public learned the full, horrifying extent of their crimes, from the murders and kidnappings to the development of their doomsday arsenal. In the end, Shoko Asahara and 12 of his key disciples were sentenced to death. After years of exhausting all possible appeals, they were executed by hanging in July of 2018, finally closing a dark and painful chapter in Japanese history. But the legacy of Aum Shinrikyo is a scar on the Japanese psyche that has never fully healed. The attack shattered the nation's deeply held myth of absolute public safety. It proved that unimaginable horror could be born not from a foreign enemy, but from within their own orderly society. The attack led to tangible changes. Public trash cans, once ubiquitous, were removed from many train stations and public areas out of fear that they could be used to hide weapons. New laws were passed to monitor and regulate religious groups. The attack forced Japan to confront the reality of domestic terrorism and the terrifying power of charismatic cult leaders to manipulate even the most intelligent minds. Even today, the story is not completely over. Aum Shinrikyo was disbanded, but it splintered into smaller successor groups, most notably Aleph and Hikari no Wa. These groups claim to have rejected Asahara's violent teachings, but they continue to practice his doctrines and recruit new members, and they remain under heavy surveillance by the Japanese government to this day. The ghost of Aum still lingers.